body, mind, and soul in the upright position. We hope you enjoy the ride.
Welcome to WAYSPACE. This is it. Here we are. Let's be here now. Oh, deep breath, huh? You want to take a deep breath with me? With a little sigh in it too. Oh man. So I haven't even totally decided on the name of this podcast episode yet. But I think I'm going to call it Allowing Murkiness. I had these other ideas about podcast ideas the last couple of weeks between recording the third episode and this one, the fourth episode. But I'm sort of in a place where I feel like, okay, this is where I'm making contact with like what I'm actually experiencing in my daily life and in my thoughts and in my mind and in my spirituality and in my practice and everything like that, that is giving me the impression that, you know, if I really want to do this podcast weekly or, you know, weekly ideally, like as a regular schedule, unless I'm, you know, away or something like that, then it can't be a thing where it's like, you know, I prepare for a performance and then I just give it exactly what the performance needs. Like, this is not that. I mean, in some ways I'm performing, I guess, but it's more like, it's like a diary entry, a mixture between a diary entry and a performance, you know? And so I've been sort of reflecting on that. And that's sort of part of what I want to talk about in today's podcast. And I feel like I won't really have like an intro and a regular part of the podcast. It's sort of just going to be one big venting conversation. You know what I mean? But I definitely feel like, you know, the way that I'm feeling right now is, and I'll get into it later, is this sense of murkiness, like things are murky, you know, and I looked up the definition and it's like foggy, unclear, difficult to get through, maybe gunky, to use a term I talked about in the last episode, and things like that, sort of muddy. And, you know, I was sort of basically experiencing like depression and in particular sort of the symptoms of what depression feels like for me and how I can feel that it's happening. So like in some ways I don't feel like calling it depression is always the most helpful to me in understanding what's going on. So I actually, you know, in some ways I decided to do this episode like this today and this week because of really just the way that I was talking in my morning pages. And if you're not familiar with morning pages, I basically write 3 pages stream of consciousness every morning. I've been doing it since I think sometime in March. So it's been about three and a half months or so of doing this. And it comes from The Artist's Way, which is a book by Julia Cameron that, you know, I feel like a lot of artists are aware of at this point. I feel like I've seen more and more people engaging with the book and working through it because it sort of works through exercises. But anyway, regardless of whether I'm working through the exercises of the book or not, I write 3 pages stream of consciousness every morning. And in these pages, I began by just noticing the way that I was feeling physically, which is what happens for me is, and I don't want to call it like just the way that depression manifests. It sort of is, but it's just when my emotions start to get backed up sort of and clogged, it is in my face and I can feel it. It's sort of like, and I have this on video, so you can I'll sort of like act it out on video. But and you might relate to this, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it happens for everybody differently. But what happens to me is I gain like buildup of something, and I guess it's emotion. It's like tiny little like emotional like gunk inside what feels to be physically my face. And so I feel like heaviness in my nose area. I feel heaviness in my cheeks under my eyes. The contours of my face feel really thick. So sort of like if you're like looking out at the world and you can kind of, we have a general sense of like where our face is, you know what I mean? We can kind of like tell that it's around our eyes, and it feels like the contours are heavy, and it's sort of like in my forehead and stuff like that. It's very interesting. And it's not the same as like a sinus headache or something like that. It's got its own distinct particular heaviness. And in thinking about that, I came to this feeling of like murkiness, and that it feels thick and gunky. And it definitely has to do with my thoughts and the sort of the situations I found myself in the last week or so, and feeling definitely overwhelmed. I think I talked about this in the second episode, like in the balancing acts one, where depression for me manifests as almost like this balancing act with when I start to feel overwhelmed, my body and my mind sort of start to shut down and use thoughts coming in as a reason to turn away from the world and retreat and sort of reject what's going on. And, that's a scary thing for me, because I feel like it's like I'm in a place where I get really happy and excited, and I want to open to the world and share who I am and allow people in and say, oh, I would love to do that with you. I'm available for this. Are you available for this? Let's connect. Let's make some great things. Let's do these wonderful things. And then I get to a point where I sort of almost like overstep with myself, and I get into a place where I mean, I've mentioned this before in terms of burnout, but it's sort of what happens is then, if we want to use I'm going to take it into metaphorical territory now, because I think it'll be even better symbolically, particularly since we have this ship and boat metaphor, of the cover art and things like that. So the way that the boat is on course, it's like, okay, so I'm going on course. It's cool. It's nice. Oh, interesting. There's like a rocky wave right here. Oh, okay. That's cool. Let's focus on my breath, come back to what my intention is, all that good stuff. Okay, sweet. Oh, interesting. There's some gray clouds forming. Huh. Okay, well, let it go. It's no big deal. Whatever. Just keep sailing. Oh, wow. The waves are getting pretty rocky and bumpy in this area. What's going on? What is that? What is that? What is that there? And I spend some time thinking about, why are the waves so rocky here? What's going on? And so I forget to let it go, And so then the waves are rocky, and then that's a really dark cloud coming over the boat. Oh, shit. What is that? Oh, the waves are getting really rocky now, too. Oh, shit. Is that thunder? Oh, fuck. I see some lightning. Oh, fuck. It's starting to rain. It's starting to drizzle. Now, okay, I see now the waves are getting pretty rocky now. And all of a sudden, I'm in a storm. And in some ways, I'm like, oh, no, I'm not. But I can't help that the rain is pouring down on me, that it feels physically that way. That to take it into what I was literally feeling this morning, the heaviness is in my face. I can feel myself closing off, looking down more often than up. These kinds of small things that if you try to glaze over them, they can build up and build up and build up. Even if you don't want to glaze over them, they build up and build up and build up. And so I sort of get to this point where now it's like, this is happening to me, and it's all within my perception. I recognize that in some ways, my imagination. And somebody comes along in their boat, and they're like, "Hey, Jack, are we going out to this area of the ocean today? I thought we were going to do that. Is that cool? Are we going to do that?" And I'm just like, "Oh, fuck." I'm dealing with this whole fucking storm that I wasn't expecting, and they're over there in sunny territory. It seems like, that kind of perception of things. And I'm like, how am I? Even if I could get over there, what am I going to do? Just bring this storm over to them? Like, what's the deal here? What am I supposed to do here? And that kind of that's kind of the way that when I've previously opened myself, and then I'm experiencing these symptoms, the storm, depression, the murkiness, what then? I don't even know if I totally have an answer to that. I mean, ultimately, I guess if I'm just, as I do on this podcast, I just kind of allow to come out whatever comes out. And I would say it might mean saying no. it might mean saying yes anyway and just doing your best with it and offering as much of your present self as you can. Um, but yeah, there's not really a clear answer. And so what I come back to, and this is sort of what I started with and what I was talking about in my morning pages, is a sense of just recognizing and noticing what it feels like to be within this experience, within this state, this murky state. Yeah, allowing the murky state. Maybe that'll be the episode title. We'll see. But you get the idea. So in some ways, I guess that's an intro. That gives you some context of where I feel like I'm at right now. So what do I mean by murky? It's the gunky stuff. It's when a thought comes into your head and you're letting it go, but they're way stickier than usual. And then another thought comes in, it sticks to you. Another thought comes in, it sticks to you. And all of a sudden you're like enclosed and clothed by all of these different thoughts that have arisen, and it feels inescapable. And the question of whether you can escape it or not is not even a worthwhile question, because it feels like everything is so demanding and so immediate, and it requires your immediate attention. You know what I mean? So in this episode, I kind of want to continue talking about that and about what I do and because I'm literally going through it right now, but also what you can do whenever you're feeling this, because, this is a part of the human experience, and I'm going to talk about this, as we go on. But if it's a part of the human experience, this is not something to reject. If I have tried to reject this state and this feeling so many times in my life, and it feels like what happens is it makes everything stickier, which is like, it's that quicksand thing. It's the finger trap thing. If you try to pull out of it, it's still got you. It's really got you. Like, it'll get you more and more and more. So I want to sort of go deeper into this murkiness aspect, particularly within my spiritual practice, and where I feel like, in terms of like seeing the storm clouds, where, to get back to that earlier metaphor, where they come up. So for me, I'm in a place where, I've gone through a whole host of experiences and different practices and things that have really been wonderfully beneficial to me. That being said, because I've gone with so much wonder and curiosity and truly just passion for learning different practices and going as deep as I can with them, that I'm able to do, is that it takes me into places where teachers that I come across start to contradict each other. And this isn't me talking now. This isn't the first time that I've experienced it that way. I've certainly experienced things like I read lots of Ram Dass and listened to lots of Ram Dass stuff. And then I came across like Chogyam Trungpa, who, called Ram Dass a charlatan, you know what I mean? And called the sort of being your own witness a silly practice, kind of. I'm not quoting him directly, but it's that kind of thing. And ironically, Trungpa invited Ram Dass to, be an instructor, a teacher at Naropa University the first summer that it was open, during the summer sessions. So it's not like Chogyam Trungpa was sort of rejecting of this contradiction, but he was very much so willing to point it out. Now, this is this particular contradiction that I felt like I discovered, which was a bit of a popping of my bubble. I felt like I was on track. I was doing this. I was, witnessing, all this kind of stuff. And it was sort of popped like, in cutting through spiritual materialism, particularly. And I was able to hold it and recognize that, okay. So it's helpful to have both understandings and hold them both. You know what I mean? And I feel like I'm in that place again, but it's a wider fissure. Is it a fissure? Yeah. Wider fissure, a wider separation between the things that are contradicting each other right now, which is basically, and I talked about this a little bit on the last podcast, but now I feel like in the thick of experiencing it and trying to get a sense of what I really want, which is this issue of desire, and not just like desire itself, but what I really want in my life and in my practices, and what the point of this is. I mean, it's funny. The first episode is called "What's the Point?" and none of this stuff I feel like is like a closed book. It's all like different doorways or different books that I open, and I just leave them open. And in some ways, that's a wonderful thing because it allows us to continue to think about it and have conversations, and they're worth listening to again. I've definitely listened to some of my earlier episodes again when I've been out on a walk or something, and it's interesting. It really is like an audio diary entry that just also happens to be public. So within my spiritual practice, I'm thinking about this issue of desire, and I've had profound understandings and sort of illuminative moments studying Buddhism, studying Taoism, studying Hinduism, studying Eastern mysticism and practices that have been translated over and over and over again for the last 1,000 years and then retranslated into the West, particularly, and told to me by Western seekers, formerly Western seekers, that went to the East or studied about things from the East and then said, this is what it's about. And, I've gotten both sort of educational experiences, both learning from people who grew up in, learned in, and sort of were, I guess, Eastern by their sort of lifelong path and how they were born into. They didn't come from the West and discover it. They were born into it and then maybe came to the West to share it with Westerners. That being said, I've also had exposure to Westerners that went to the East, benefited a lot, came back, and then talked about it. I've had both educational experiences, and both have had their own really valuable, it feels to me, insights. That being said, there's also the question of other spiritual practices that treat desires as sacred and as wonderful things that are, I mean, in some cases, quite literally gifts from God or just sacred to the human experience, which I believe they are. In my experience, it feels like they are. Now, that being said, and this is maybe where I get to a point where I feel like in this contradiction, I can incorporate a little bit. That's been something that I can feel that I've really wanted to do is find ways to incorporate everything that I'm learning into what I've got, into my sort of spiritual toolkit, so to speak, and sort of filter them through and understand them through the lenses that they need to be understood through, which is that I feel like the question of desire being sacred has to do with my incarnation, my human life in this part of the world, in this time period where desire is nevertheless going to be a part of what's going on in my life. There's not really any getting around that. Even if I said I don't want any more desire, I would still be rejecting desire, which comes from my desire to let go of it, or to get away from it. And I've had that perspective at times, particularly like last year. I had this perspective like, okay, so this is what's going to happen is now that I've discovered that the whole point is to get rid of all of my attachments and all of my desires, that's what's going to end up happening. And now it's up to me to do it as quickly as possible. And the issue with that is then it becomes an achievement strategy for me to, once again, like all the different things in my life, achieve what I feel like I am supposed to achieve based on what I read or what I heard or what I was taught. And anytime that I feel like I have to achieve something because I'm supposed to want that, even if it's the lack of desire, it still ends up being a dead end, or before it's even a dead end, which in my case, I don't often get to dead ends. I often get to points where I lose the curiosity or lose the interest because I can see that it's going to be a dead end. Like it's like the sign where it says, no outlet comes up before I actually get there. And I'm like, ugh. So then I turn around, that I realized, okay, no. Like my life is informed by my desires. Even my, venture into my spiritual practices are informed by my desires. There's no getting around that. And I think, there are certainly Eastern mystical teachers and saints and gurus that recognize this and appreciate it and appreciate the paradox and teach the paradox of desire, so that, you know, you can both at the same time see that desirelessness is the liberation, is like absolute non-dual awakening and sort of a sense of purity, of non-identification. But at the same time, you can also appreciate that the whole point of us being here is that we came here and incarnated as human beings because we desired something, whether it was the experience of eating food or the experience of taking a shit or the experience of love or the experience of loss or all of those things. Because I think, at least for me, clearly that's what my soul was looking for, or my awareness was looking for, or, you know, karma was sort of engaging with, however you want to put it, whether you identify me as a soul being or not. Clearly that there were some desire mechanisms that brought me to this point and have me here desiring this. And now in a place where I'm desiring answers to what the fuck I'm supposed to do, like for real, like, because here's the thing. I've had this narrative in the last year or so where my life has, I mean, and I say my life, but it really is my relationship to life, to reality, and relationship to myself has improved so much more love, particularly self-love, like, and care for myself, like care in the way that I care for myself, like I am the witness to my incarnation in my existence. And so I have mechanisms and practices for remembering that. And it feels so wonderful to have that connection. And at the same time, my ego was under the impression that I was doing that because it was the right way to live and because it was going to pay off in full, in more than full, if my ego could just give up this sense of control, of controlling my life in a ironically non-controlling way, like in a way where I didn't have control over my life. So my ego can control the narrative by saying, oh, you're doomed to failure, or oh, you're outrunning failure at every moment. That's what you're here to do, Jack. You're outrunning the failure at every moment. And you know, my spiritual practice, my soul, my Atman, my inner self, God, the part of me that I discover when I'm, or rediscover, or become particularly in tune with when I'm tripping, or when I'm in really deep meditation in the right kinds of moments and the right circumstances, there was sort of a promise made that, like, you know, this deeper inner part of me, am always going to be here for you, Jack. You know, that kind of conversation. And what that told me as Jack, as like sort of my ego sense, was that, okay, I can let go of all this shit then. I don't need to be so controlling. I don't need to be so, you know, trying to be so in charge of the narrative that I need to be outrunning this failure all the time. I don't need to do any of that stuff that I thought I was supposed to do. I can just relax. I can chill the fuck out and put my feet up and just sit and eat and sleep and shit and love. And I'll be okay. And now I'm sort of exposing myself to things that are saying, no, that's actually not enough. If you've been told that, you're going to end up in a place of unfulfillment, which I'm like, oh, fuck. Like, just when I was starting to get a sense of fulfillment from allowing myself to be this way, I'm now, you know, seeing things that are like, no, you know, is it really spirituality if you're not aspirational with it? If you don't have a definite aim? And it's like, fuck, like I've tried to have definite aims my whole life. Do I really need to have more definite aims? Like, can I just fucking eat and sleep and shit and love? And, you know, this argument is not, I mean, in some ways, I guess it's two spiritual teachers that have different feelings about things, but it's also to myself. Like, these parts of myself, that there's a part of me that wants to achieve, that wants success, that wants to be wealthy, that wants to be able to afford to move out and take care of myself completely, you know, and to be able to afford to buy my own house or live in my own apartment or, you know, buy a car or, you know, all these different things, you know, have my own business or whatever the fuck it is that it's going to be. If it's a 9-to-5 that I end up wanting to have, or I end up being able to, you know, truly make it big with music or whatever, like all these things I do have parts of me that really want that, you know, and want to use my spiritual practice in order to sort of get to those milestones. And I've been, you know, certainly working on that. And I think a big part of that has been opening myself to the creativity that I truly have as a potential to me. But at the same time, I realized that the only reason, or at least in my narrative, is the bargain I made was that the reason that I'm at this point is because I let go of the pressure of needing to do that and feeling like I'm only going to be enough if I can, you know, move out of my family home, you know, my parents' house, and take care of myself completely and be completely independent, and all these things that in some ways are kind of murky. You know, they're not totally clear because they're not so much goals I'm trying to achieve so much as failure I'm trying to outrun. You know what I mean? And that the issue between failure you're trying to outrun versus actual goals that are clearly defined that you're trying to achieve is where I'm at right now. Is that my desires in my life have been so caught up in like the desire to outrun failure. And the issue with that is that's all in the negative. And for me, Eastern practices in particular, but certain Christian mystical practices, like stuff I've been learning from Neville Goddard and others, they're related to that. I mean, they treat desires as sacred, but in a way where you can relax. Like you can really use your imagination a lot more than you think. And it really is more the operative mechanism here. And these things have helped me sort of let go of the desire not to fail, and to forget about that, to let go of that. And what I'm seeing now is maybe I'm at an impasse, maybe I'm at a crossroads where it's time to think about, okay, there are cravings and desires, like, you know, the craving to snack on something when it would be really, not to say I shouldn't snack, but to snack on something when what would be really helpful is if I could, you know, talk about the things that are bothering me, that would actually bring some healing for me. That there's a difference there. And so I'm moving in the direction of recognizing that some desires are sort of illusory, that they are that hungry ghost type of desire. And then some desires are real sacred aspects of my experience and what my soul truly wants. Now, at a certain level, even the craving like desires, I feel like are guiding me to my truest desires. And I think that's a delicate thing to do and a delicate game to play. But for me, I think a lot of my Eastern practices and meditation in particular have been about being able to see through the desires that are not serving me, that are actually desires to run away from failure, and to sort of like see through all the dust and pollen and murkiness and fog so that I can see that I don't have to worry about desiring not to fail, that there is no failure here, or it's all failure. I mean, you know what I mean? So in that case, there is no real failure. They're all stepping stones to the next thing. I say that both in it sort of being sort of a, I guess a cheesy thing, or maybe like a thing you know, a cliche that you've heard before, but also truly like in lived experience, that is actually how I experience any failures I've ever had, that they've been stepping stones for me to be able to do something that was really new for me and really beneficial. I mean, a huge thing for me was I had a big savings account of lots of money. I mean, like I had a bar mitzvah when I was younger, and I had, you know, thousands of dollars saved up in there, and gift money and stuff that I had just saved up and didn't touch. And after I got out of college, I was like, all right, you know, my dream is to make it big. I want to be like a big artist and go on tour and have fans and be like a dope fucking rapper that is like big, you know? And so I spent money like it was really addictive, like on sessions, on promotional stuff, on PR, on marketing, on all this shit that I wasn't really doing my due diligence to make sure that it was worthwhile. And probably within a year and a half, thousands, you know, like so much money in comparison to what I've got in my bank account now, like absurdly more than what I've got now, was gone. It was, so quickly, it was like $400, $500 a session every week, like thousands of dollars on PR that got me, not to be cynical about it, but pretty much bullshit articles. I mean, the people seemed nice, but it didn't really get me. It didn't get me what the money, was spent for. And that's, totally on me not doing the due diligence to make sure that I was getting what I thought I deserved. But at the same time, how was I supposed to know? This was the learning experience. This was when I learned the dangers and the perils of the music industry. And so I get to this point now where, in terms of seeing this failure and this sort of I was outrunning failure. That's why I was spending so much. I was trying to outrun the failure of having spent everything and losing it all and having nothing to show for it. And then I got to a point where, of course, I have stuff to show for it. I mean, it became sort of like my grad school experience after college. Like, I went to grad school for learning how to both fail within the music industry several times, but also learn how to really be a fucking songwriter. Like, truly write songs and put them out and promote them and play shows and sell out my own headlining show and all of these things that actually, when you look at it, are lots of fucking successes and lots of wonderful achievements. And, but many of those achievements were built on outrunning failure. And when they were the highest of my achievements, it was because I was still so passionate. Even though I was outrunning the failure, I was still so passionate. And so what happens then is I've got what feels like failures to me, sort of accruing. But then it's time to step on them and jump higher from where you were, And that's when I started to, make good friends with people and start to make music with them in a way where we were truly collaborating and I didn't feel like I was a fucking client. And not to say that it's bad to be a client. I'm still clients of people and people are clients of my freelance work, but I didn't want to only be a client. I think it's important for anybody that is a client to anybody to be able to feel like you also have people in your life, or creatives or collaborators or coworkers or friends, that are not spending time with you because you are their client or I am their client. And for me, like a lot of my, the 2016 to 2018 timing era of my music and stuff, I really just felt like I was just a client and just kind of alone. I was really just kind of by myself, and I didn't really have many outlets to make me feel like I was creatively stimulated in a really collaborative sense. But going really deep in that ditch got me to this point where I felt like, okay, I really want the collaborative experience, and I really want to open myself to engaging with people in a way that feels wonderful. And, one of my best friends, Ale Fabrizio, once we started meeting up, and it was just like amazing. I found one of my best friends that I know will be a lifelong friend to me. And it was a whole different kind of experience of making music than what I had been used to the couple years before that. Now, what's interesting is in high school and early college, I did have collaborative experiences that were truly collaborative, but I lost track of them once I thought that I needed to go professional with it. And then after going through that professional experience and feeling like I failed a lot, I was able to find this sense of sort of balance with things. And here's the thing. At that point, then I started to allow my passion to take me where I wanted it to take me. And so fast forward, and now I'm like, from when I'm recording this podcast, and it'll be, I think, the last Friday, because this will come out on Monday, the 28th, I want to say. The 28th. On the 25th, I'm releasing 2 songs that I produced by myself, mixed and mastered, recorded, of course, written by myself on my live stream with my friends watching. And on a live stream with a whole setup that I created. And now I have my own professional home studio setup, all with actually pretty much money that I saved, like that I had to work for, rather than using all these savings that I got from when I was, 13. That is like not a trust fund, but you know what I mean? It's like money that is like a byproduct of my privilege, basically. And And in some ways, you could say even the money I make now, of course, is related to and could be said is just another byproduct of my privilege. But there's certainly a difference between spending money that you remember doing the work for versus spending money that just showed up in this bank account that was given to you by family. I mean, that's a sense of privilege that is one I'm so incredibly grateful for, but also is certainly a point of tender sense of like, yeah, it feels, at least in my life, it's felt icky to me. And so it just goes to show that like I wouldn't have learned the value of all of these things if I hadn't gone through it. And that's a beautiful thing to me, and that I'm really, really grateful for. Yeah, wow, we really got onto a whole tangent here with like failure and the murkiness of sort of being within the music industry, but I guess that's what I needed to talk about today, you know what I mean? And I think it's always going to be related in some ways. Like my spirituality is going to be related to what I'm so passionate about within my creative and artistic career. So getting way back to, I don't know, what was it, like 10 minutes ago, in terms of desire, is now I'm at a point where I'm not sure what I really want. Like, I was watching like somebody posted just like a TikTok about like what it's like to get signed to a major label, and they talked about their song blowing up on Spotify, and then they all of a sudden were getting calls from major labels to like sign with them, and talked about how it works and why they're so quick to want to sign because it's depreciating value the longer a song goes unsigned, and which it makes sense to me. And I was just like, ugh, do I want any of that? Did I ever want any of that? Like, to have to worry about all that shit, to be so overwhelmed by all these different things coming from all cylinders. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say that I don't want that and don't want the opportunity for, potentially big, huge, success with whatever I'm doing. But do I? Do I want that? Or do I want to just make a living off of my art in a way that is actually comfortable to me, where I feel like I have time to record a podcast, to do my live streams, to make music, to play shows? Like, I mean, I already feel overwhelmed, but like, it's interesting, like how this changes. And I'm, I mean, maybe this is partially part of how I'm dealing with my relationship to desire now. And this is sort of getting into what I was thinking the next episode would be, which is sort of about healing desire. And maybe I'll do it on that, or maybe it's kind of making its way into here, but which is sort of like my feeling about how my desires have changed a fuck ton between now and like when I was 17, 18 years old, or even when I was 22 in the last 5 years. I don't know if I have a lot more clarity over what I want, but I do have more clarity over how I want my life to feel. Like I don't want to be super fucking busy. If I have a family, like I don't want to be gone all the time. Like if I mean, not to say I'd have to be, like, I guess my ideal was I'd go on tour and tour and tour and tour. And then when it was time to, settle down and have a family, I would do that and just continue to make music and, not tour as much. Because ultimately, like, what I really want in my life is like, when it's time to settle down and have a family, to me, I don't want to be away from like my family. I want to be present with my family. I don't want to have to be focusing on my phone at fucking dinner, or like not able to be home a lot, or because I'm on tour for months at a time, like, or just bringing all of the overwhelming busyness of my work life into my family life. Like, that's not what I'm here to do. If I'm going to be a parent, like, I want to be present with my kids and give them the attention that they deserve as, new human beings, and give myself the attention that I deserve to feel in that environment too, so that I get that attention back. Like, and it's like, I'm trying to think about what's compatible here. I don't even know necessarily what's all encompassing and compatible here. I mean, ultimately, I'm going to end up with some suffering. And I remember in the last episode, I talked about I feel this fear over added suffering. And I certainly am feeling the pressure to live a life where I don't add any suffering into the world and don't add any suffering into the lives of my family and friends and loved ones and even just acquaintances. But I mean, if you've got desire, there's going to be suffering. Not to say that you shouldn't have desire, but you should just be appreciative of that. I was talking to who I mentioned earlier, Fabrizio, one of my best friends, Ale, about this, and he's been exposing himself to a lot of great stuff similar to what I have. And we've been reading this book, 365 Tao by Dengming Dao. He started reading it a little bit ago, and I've been reading it. I'm on my second time through. It's like you do a reading once per day. It's like a short page meditation. And I was talking to him about this kind of stuff, and he was talking about how, for him, like, he's not interested in getting rid of his desires. He's interested in honoring his desires and recognizing that, yes, also, there's going to be a lot of hardship involved in the desire, but it doesn't mean to stop desiring. It doesn't mean to try to escape desire just because there's going to be hardship. And I was like, I was a moment where I just like looked up at the sky and I was like, oh, fuck. Yeah. I'm not here to escape the hardship of desiring things in my life. Desire has been difficult for me in my life in terms of what I want. It's been tough to think about what I want, if I deserve what I want. I mean, that's huge. Like, a huge barrier for me has been feeling like I actually deserve to desire the things I deserve to desire. Oh, yeah. To feel like I deserve to desire the things I desire. That's a little bit of a tongue twister. Yeah, and it's interesting. And when I get to these points where I start to feel overwhelmed, I think part of it is that I'm losing sight of my purpose and what I truly desire to do. And I don't have a great answer for that right now. I mean, in some ways, this podcast is my answer, both this episode and in general. It's like, what I desire to do is to share myself with people in a way that doesn't feel like I'm going to let somebody down because I share myself. And then they're like, oh, that's great, Jack. What about this? And then I'm like, I can't deliver on that. Like, I was just sharing myself, And there's sort of a game that I get into with so many ways that I've shared myself in my life with my creativity. It's everything, it's like you're so excited to share your music with the world. So you release some songs and then people love them. And it's like, oh, that's so great. Like, I've wanted to have my art appreciated for so long. And then they say, I want to work with you. And then it becomes a task in a way to like make a commitment and deliver on a commitment. And was that what I wanted? Was what I wanted more opportunities for commitments, or was I wanted just to share? I don't know. I really don't know. Because at this point, I know that sharing my art with the world necessarily, if I really believe in it and am passionate about it and love it and it's good, is going to lead to people wanting to work with me or wanting to do something with me or engage or something like that. And for me, that sometimes that leads to the kind of emotional labor that I just don't have the capacity for. It's tough. I mean, this is why, like, last year during the pandemic, at certain points, I just kind of went ghost. I was like barely on social media and sort of was trying to escape the world. I mean, and I went into sort of this place where I was like, oh, I don't have to be part of the world. This is, in these Buddhist teachings, they teach you that, let's meditate. Let's, get rid of our attachments. And I mean, I don't mean for that to, stand for all of Buddhism. Of course not. And I have a much more, multidimensional understanding of Buddhist practices and sort of what goes into that. But I just mean that I was using it that way. You know what I mean? I was my perception that I was trying to reject and escape the difficult reality that I found myself in. Yeah. So, all right. So I've kind of gone through a lot of things. Wow, we're now at 45 minutes. This is a long episode. Um, Before we like totally conclude this like off the rails sort of conversation, at least the way it feels to me, I look forward to listening to this later. I sort of do the thing where I finish it up, I set it up, I'm done, and then later I'll listen to it once I know it's already going to be coming out, because that's just the way I like to express myself at this point. But at this point, I want to talk about like advice, you know, advice for myself, advice for you if you're listening to this. I like particularly like this kind of episode. Like I really appreciate it. Hopefully hopefully you resonate with it in some way, or it at least is, you know, a nice experience for you to be able to hear kind of what goes on in my head, even when I'm maybe not feeling 100%, you know, and I do this anyway, because this is a practice. You know what I mean? Doing this practice of stream of consciousness, basically semi-prompted, but by other stream of consciousness stuff in audio format has become, I could feel already in the 4th episode, a really important practice for me. And so regardless of how far you've made it, I mean, if you're here listening to this, you hear this, you know what I mean? So I can feel it being really important for me to do this. So I'm really grateful to you for listening. I'm really grateful that this is even possible at this point. So advice, things to leave us with. The first thing I think that's really important is to hold a particular sense of faith. And I don't totally know how to explain it other than that. I mean, the ways that you can hold this sense of faith is in some ways, you know, with non-clarity and just have the faith anyway and sort of seem a little bit delusional to yourself. At times it feels like that to me. But you can also sort of rely on your practices, right? So I rely on this podcast. I rely on my meditation. I rely on making music. I rely on streaming. I rely on preparing meals for myself. Cooking for myself has become such a wonderful practice, not just in terms of like it being meditative, but just in getting in touch with myself and getting out of my head a little bit and letting it come into a creative process that is also nourishing, both emotionally, spiritually, and literally physically. And reminders to yourself, you know, I have things that I've written down that I've written in the most sort of, not necessarily blissed out, but at least when I've been felt a sense of orientation to where I need to be. And this actually, I have this board where I sometimes make checklists, sometimes make like, oh, these are the songs to finish on the project or stuff like that. But sometimes I need to just erase all that shit and just write something down that's a reminder to myself that can never fail to center me in any kind of a way, even if it just balances me a little bit. And right now, I have something written on the wall that I just did maybe a week ago that says, I am always here with the faith that never leaves. And, you know, that's a message to myself from my deepest, highest self, from God to me, from me to you. You know, I'm always here with the faith that never leaves. And I hope that you can feel like that means you can too, that you can have faith that never, ever, ever leaves. So even if you feel like you don't have faith, you can rely on this sense of faith that it will come back to you, or not even just that it will come back to you, that you will move into a new state. That right now, for example, I'm in a murky state of consciousness, and I will inevitably move to a more clear state of consciousness, a more sprawling, wide open, clear blue sky state of consciousness. I have been in murky states of consciousness before. I have moved out of them into brighter states of consciousness before. And everything in life relies on this change. I mean, not even relies on this change. Change is life. Life is change. That's all. That's the whole story. And so the faith that never leaves is that change never leaves. Change never stops. That's the only consistent thing, you know, until you get to a point where everything is change all at once. And then it's like, you know, it's sort of like you get if you're looking at all the colors, it looks like there are no colors, you know, that sort of paradox. the dual non-dual paradox is similar to that as well. Yeah, so I think in times like these, leaning on one's practices are really important. And I think the more that you can be clear on your practices and what really works for you when you have the energy and the aspirational spiritual quality to come up with the practices and to engage with the practices, it can be really, really helpful in times like these. I know for myself that's the case. Like the fact that I meditate the way I brush my teeth, or I write my morning pages the way I brush my teeth. It's very grounding for me. And at this point, the way I do a podcast, the way I make music, I want to be doing this. It really brings me joy and brings me fulfillment, even when I'm not feeling so joyous, I still feel a sense of reliance on it and feeling like I can rely on it, which is ultimately relying on myself. And that's really huge, is that when you engage with your practices and you feel like you can rely on your practices, you come to see that you're able to rely on yourself, that these are things that you've built for yourself that are a part of your life that don't leave, because they don't have to, that they're available to you, just like, going to the bathroom for yourself, And I mean, at points in our lives, things like going to the bathroom can become difficult, but this is why we have practices that can be sort of be like helpers, so that if one thing that we do, like me brushing my teeth or taking a shower or eating or something, becomes really difficult for whatever reason, whether it's physically, like my body in older age, I'm unable to do certain things for myself, or I'm feeling like I'm unable to get sleep because I'm dealing with insomnia or something like that, like whatever things that we might experience, that we have other practices in our lives that can make up the slack of that self-care, and that there's going to be self-care even if we don't feel able to do it, and that we can kind of let go and just relax into the faith that never leaves, the faith that never leaves. It's the faith that is breathing my body right now. I mean, for so much of this episode, I wasn't aware of my breath, Not to say that's like, oh, I should have been aware of my breath and meditating or whatever. Of course not. This is the meditation. But that's faith that never leaves. The faith that my body will continue breathing for itself. It continues, And not to say that that's all encompassing. Like, there are times where it's hard to breathe in our lives. Like, we're in situations where you can't breathe. But I just mean that there can always be a way to relax into a sense of faith that never leaves. And really, it's really supposed to point you to literally a sense of faith that never leaves. Yeah. So, with that being said, we've got our longest episode so far. I read a thing on, where was it? I think it was on Reddit or something, or it was just in an email that said that 99% of podcasts don't get past the third episode. And so if you are 97%, I think, something like that, like 97% of podcasts don't get past the third episode. And then 99% of podcasts don't get past the 20th episode. So we made a great milestone here. We're in the top whatever percentile. I don't remember the exact quote, but whatever percentile of the all podcasters. And I look forward to doing many, many more of these. This was a huge for me in seeing that regardless of how I'm doing and how I'm feeling and how connected I am to sort of the outlook that I want to bring to the world of love, that I can still do this and do this practice and have it be worthwhile regardless. And yeah, and I hope that there's anything that you can get out of this. I just really appreciate you listening and giving your time to this. Yeah. So what am I going to leave us with? I mean, certainly the Patreon is getting pretty good. So it's patreon.com/JackInTheWay. If you're not familiar with Patreon, it's a subscription tier type of thing where you can pay like $4 a month or $10 a month, I think, or 11 or $20 a month or something like that for different exclusive things. And it's just a great way to support me as an artist directly without sort of like, oh, you just listen to my song on Spotify and then I get a couple cents per stream. You know what I mean? Instead, you can sort of subscribe to me in a way where I feel truly valued, and there's a place like a sacred sort of sanctuary like space for me to share my demos, my unreleased music, previews of music, graphic design, like different cover art stuff, graphics, little video edits, all these kinds of things that I may not feel comfortable to share totally publicly with the world just yet or at all, but I do feel comfortable to share with somebody who's willing to, you know, subscribe and even beyond subscribing, but just check the Patreon and kind of think of themselves as somebody who really supports me in that kind of a way. So yeah, so if you feel so inclined, you know, I'll be on there, and you know, I don't have any intention to stop it, so it'll always be there. And of course, there's always the Twitch stream that I do Tuesday, Thursday, Friday that you can check out, where I kind of oftentimes I feel like I start riffing off of things I talk about in the podcast because I'm just thinking about it, you know. So yeah, that's all I got today. This is quite a podcast episode. I love you. Thank you so much for listening. Oh man, what a day. Let's sail through this murkiness and realize that the storms come and they go, and that's just how it goes, you know. And there's something we can appreciate about it, that there's something that we can gain from these kinds of experiences, that they really are for good reason and have lots of fulfilling purpose in our lives. Yeah. All right. I love you. I'll see you soon. You're totally good. You're totally good. I'm totally good. We got this. We got this. We're good. We're good. I'll see you next week. Here's to remembering who we are. Love you. Peace.